Irina?
Yes.
Irina?
You're
Okay,
up.
now we can hear you. Okay.
Oh, okay. The slide says everything that I can say here. I am a web developer. I worked at Stanford full time, and then my son had migraine, so I had to start Fibonacci Web Studio, and we are team of experts, and we develop websites for research and academia, and our motto is like better tools, better research. We build both websites and apps that allow productivity improvements, that support research presentations and stuff.
I'm Eric Itala. I'm a web designer in strategic communications for undergraduate education at Penn State. That's a mouthful of words. Undergrad ed it's 14 diverse units, mostly administrative. We deal with enhancing teaching and learning at Penn State. And our office, we have 6 staff members and 2 web developers. We just added a web developer in August. So that's who we are.
And I am Larry Krott-Baker, senior backdrop developer with Atten Design Group. And Atten does strategy, design, development for mission-driven organizations. That's thinking along the lines of nonprofits, higher ed, some government stuff, libraries, etc. We make the case, I think, from an agency perspective that for the place Backdrop has in the conversation. The quote here in front of you kind of sets the stage for this presentation, and also in many ways for the reason that Backdrop exists in the first place. One of the most emphasized benefits of Backdrop, I think, is its affordability. Drupal is an amazing product, of course, but not every site needs that much firepower or has the budget to sustain it. And what Backdrop does is provides much of Drupal's traditional flexibility and power, but tends to cost a lot less to set up, upgrade to, or maintain over time. So Zach Chandler, the former director of what was then called Research, IT, and Innovation, and he said this was in relation to a project I'll be talking a little bit more about shortly, but and this quotes are from a case study that Pantheon posted on their site. So he said, "We have a fiduciary duty to our university. We take stewardship of funds and resources seriously. With Backdrop on Pantheon, we were able to save nearly $500,000. That's not a small amount," he said. "It's equivalent to several postdoc salaries, which, quite honestly, the university and the world needs more than we need any particular website technology, assuming the alternative is just as viable, which Backdrop is." So using this as kind of the basis for the conversation going forward on Backdrop in higher ed. Over to you, Irina.
Let's do that at a very high level. What are the big trends in higher ed that are related to Drupal 7 end of life? For the decade, Drupal 7 was a great choice for higher education sites because it offered a combination of power and simplicity, where lots of work that in Drupal 10 has to be done by developers was done by site builders. And this was the reason why Drupal 7 was and still is very popular in higher ed. With the Drupal 7 end of life coming on January 5 of 2025, we'd have time, higher ed have time between now and basically November of this year to figure out solution for supporting security. And we have Alex Keller here. He can just gave an excellent presentation about security concerns. And Drupal 7 end of life is very much related to security patches and security support for Drupal 7. So with the amount of sites that are still out there and are in Drupal 7, in higher ed, everyone is looking for what is my options in the next 6 months. Do I have funds to migrate to Drupal 10? Can I sacrifice some feature and go to something more simple? Different people are coming in with different proposals. There are initiative groups that says, oh, we'll just support Drupal 7. Some hero devs is offering certified support. And not everyone knows that there is Backdrop CMS that provides very efficient solution for lots of their sites.
So when we went looking at Backdrop for what we were planning on doing with our Drupal 7 sites, some of the advantages that made sense to us were it was a direct upgrade. You didn't really, you could preserve the existing content. You could have the features of the site. It wasn't a huge migration lift. All of our stakeholders are used to the Drupal 7 environment, the administration, content creation, those areas. Cost effective was a very big deal for us, and we'll maybe touch into that later. And in terms of the functionality of Backdrop, obviously it's a fork of Drupal 7, so everything in content types, functionalities, themes were very similar. We didn't see that there was going to be a large change that we would have to cope with long term.
I'm going to go very high level overview of what's the difference between upgrade and migration. This has been discussed in many articles, podcasts, presentations, everything. The main difference between upgrade and migration is that when people are doing migrations, they have to reset, they have to set new content types. Everything is new on the new site. With the upgrade, path is much shorter. You set up new Backdrop sites, you set the modules, and there are lots of tools that allow you to set up these modules more efficiently than running install one by one. And the next step is the core of the upgrade, because you take Drupal 7 database, you drop into your new Backdrop CMS database, and then you run an upgrade. And then you have the site that has same content, same views, users, everything. So if you like your site and your site works well for you, and you're not trying to redesign it or change it, you just want this smoke certificate, which is, by the way, not applicable to electric cars, but there's always like this stamp of approval that says your site is secure. Then that might be the shortest, the most efficient path. You don't need to retrain your users. We just had a presentation about gin and tonic and 7 theme for administration. So you preserve the flow very efficiently. And then you live happily ever after. Don't forget that part.
So what I believe was the first major Backdrop project at Stanford was the one that the quote that we listed at the beginning was in relation to. It was a project for Solo and seed funding. Solo is a student application management platform with at the time, over 6 years of ongoing development that we're building on top of year after year. And the estimate that it was the estimate was that it would take 3,500 to 4,000 hours to rebuild that in Drupal 9. And that was going to be a 4-person team full-time for 5 months. The Backdrop option finished in at 550 hours for a 1.5-person team in 3 months, which included vacation time in December. If you're interested in more details, I know this has been covered previously, so I'm not dwelling on it too much, but there's the featured case study on Pantheon. It's been written up in a number of other cases, but obviously the savings on this one are pretty dramatic. And in this case, accentuated because there's a lot of custom code that basically worked very easily with Backdrop that would have had to be completely rewritten if it was going to go to modern Drupal. Just some example, that an authoritative or comprehensive list in any means. These are just some sites that we've worked on or that we know of, Backdrop in higher ed. So we'll talk in more depth on some of these Penn State sites that we've upgraded recently. We've got we finished that one under budget, so we have time for a couple extra ones. We may do some more after that. We'll have to see how the timing all works on that. And then at Stanford, we've got a bunch of sites, solo and seed funding, obviously, BioX, 6 sites for the Graduate School of Education. You can see the sites listed here, and I know of at least one at UC Berkeley, and another one is on the way. So it is definitely an option that's beginning to be more and more used, I think.
One of examples is most recent projects. We're doing a lot of migration. We're migrating lots of sites for Graduate School of Education. And these are sites with different level of complexity. And in the past, we were using either an option to move it to plain HTML, which sometimes breaks certain things and also removes backend. Some sites were moved to new sites platform, which is on Drupal 10, but has limited functionality comparing to Drupal 7 platform that we were using. And so some organizations said, okay, we'll sacrifice these features or those or other features. And then when Backdrop CMS became a sustainable choice with a new Stanford theme that based on Decanter, it has same look and feel like Drupal 10 sites or React sites or what you call it. The sites are hosted on Stanford Amazon Web Services, which is also within the Stanford ecosystem. And with CK Editor and Core and D2B module that makes migration very efficient, we were able to complete these migrations very efficiently. And they're coming live within next month or so after final check-in. I also want to mention that Stanford offers Stanford Domains, which is a system that has been developed about 5 years ago to support smaller groups like smaller labs or sites for postdocs or faculty who for some reason prefer this hosting. And Backdrop is available there as an installatron like Softaculous, all these tools that do not require any coding skills. That's one side of it. On the other side, some time ago, I created code-based Backdrop CMS with Stanford theme project, and I would like to invite Stanford collaborators to join me in making this project more efficient. I'm going to put a link in chat. Eric, off to you.
Yes.
What's at Penn State?
So the situation we found ourselves at Penn State is that we have or had 11 Drupal 7 websites. Some were inherited from other developers, some other vendors, some were built by myself. The goal there was to try to make as many of these sites as similar and modular as possible with kind of a generalized base theme, using features to kind of push various functionality about. But you know, that works to a certain extent, but it doesn't really work long term unless you can really plan that out. Of course, D7 end of life is coming up. We were in a situation where we have limited funding and a limited development team. That was mostly me until August. We don't get any kind of centralized IT support for web development at Penn State, so it makes it a little bit difficult. We looked at the various options: Drupal 10, WordPress, long-term support of D7, and Backdrop came up as an option that was suggested to us by a couple of different vendors. We started taking a look at it and realized that we would be able to use that on a number of our websites. So if we go to the next. These are kind of the general, the first 6 sites that we looked at. If you look at them, there is some kind of similarity to the theme there, but everybody kind of wants their own look and feel. But we chose these 6 specific sites because they were the least, I want to use the word least complex in terms of things like content types, functionality, unusual things behind the scenes. Some of them had very, under 50 nodes. So we thought that these 6 sites would be a good place to start and work our way up from probably the simplest to the most complicated, which is actually the undergraduate ed site itself. One of the big things that we really want to do is have this unified theme. We were kind of already there with most of those sites, but we wanted to have something that we could use across sites now and in the future. We also have a Penn State branding has become a very big thing, and they like to have things, very consistent. And there's occasionally a bit of change there, so we have to keep up with that. And we wanted some flexibility in terms of layout, both in terms of what I as a developer could come up with, but also in terms of what the stakeholders could produce. We had replicated some of that, built some of that functionality into the sites that it was sensible to do so, but we wanted to do that kind of for all the sites and give everybody a little bit more control over things. So if you look at where we are now, these are actually the Backdrop sites with this new unified theme. And if you look, you can think back to the previous site. They're very similar to what the sites originally looked like. So the stakeholders are very happy that they don't, they get a refreshed theme. It's very consistent. It's been we've worked out some of the issues with it, and we've increased the accessibility. In some cases, we did change some color schemes to both enhance the accessibility and to kind of stay within the Penn State brand standards. It's over to Laren.
So I wanted to highlight that I think is super cool about this collection of sites and the way that we were able to do it, because we had, we had more than one site to work on. We found ways to do the efficiencies that Eric was talking about with a unified theme that can be used across all of them with some, configurable options for color scheme and so on. But also to take some of the things that had been sort of baked into the theme or done in a way that only a developer could access on the old sites, and open that up using paragraphs in a way that allowed you to make those changes more broadly, more easily through the user interface. But then also, when we implemented a new paragraph type, say we got to site number 3, and there was something that made sense to implement as a paragraph type, we created it, added it into the theme, and then we could take the configuration files and backport them very simply to the earlier sites. So what we ended up seeing was that as we went along, even the simpler sites that we did at the beginning began to get much more improved functionality, and they began to be able to do much more with their website than they could at the beginning, because all the improvements we were making as we went along came back to them. And everything we had done at the beginning made its way into the later sites as well. So the individual sites had much more expanded functionality, but there's also much more consistency across all the sites in terms of, we could build the paragraphs as we wanted to. And so, they're accessible, they're optimized. And then that configuration system allowed us to share that. I have a quick demo here. If the video will play, I'll give it a shot. This is just showing on one of the sites the paragraphs implementation for these components. You can go in and then we were able to make it consistent with some branding colors so that these options were available in a brand friendly way. Sorry, I have to find back my presenter slides. Okay. So Backdrop Core contains updates to, a whole raft of libraries. We have CKEditor 5 in Core, latest version of jQuery, which is obviously a far cry from what's available in Drupal 7. And if you were present earlier, you heard a little bit about the new admin theme that's available for Backdrop, which is Gin. You're maybe familiar with it for Drupal. It's now available in Backdrop. The upgrade process as well. I mean, we make a pretty big deal about how it's an upgrade process, not a migration, and you can keep your content types, your views, all that stuff. But that doesn't mean you have to keep all of it. It provided an opportunity as well to prune modules that weren't being needed, consolidate, standardize others, fix bugs on some modules, adapt the views that we were using as needed, completely remove content types that weren't needed anymore, kind of clean things up in that way. So it still provides the upgrade process, even though it's simple and can carry everything over. Doesn't mean you have to keep everything if you don't want it anymore, obviously. And then some of the modules we needed weren't yet available for Backdrop, so we ported those and then made them available in the contrib space. Just a quick screenshot of the dark mode view in Gin for Backdrop. And then as part of the process, after each new site was close to launch, we would have our accessibility expert do a review and provide guidance to the PSU team on anything that was content related that could be fixed. And then just making sure that all the, the paragraphs and different types of implementation were done in an accessible way. Oops, I'm gonna back up just one second. So one of the benefits that this process allowed was that in some cases it identified things that were that could be improved in terms of accessibility that were coming from Backdrop Core or from a contributed module. And so we were able to produce fixes for that and submit that back to Core and back to modules so that those accessibility improvements then are available to everybody else out of the box, which is pretty awesome.
So one of the changes throughout this process is we now have a more robust development environment. We have live staging and dev versions of the sites. Everything is managed in Git in terms of obviously the site itself, but also the config, which is really important with all the configuration manager. All of our sites are self-hosted within Penn State. We're really not, our unit isn't really big enough to warrant something like Pantheon to run all these sites, so it's not very cost effective, but internally it is. The one area that takes a little bit more setup is the initial Apache config. For every site, you end up with 3 sites. You have to set up a single sign-on for each site. It's a little more work initially, but once it's set, it's set. And at the moment, part of this that actually makes my life easier is these sites were hosted across 5 or 6 different VM systems because we inherited them. But they were all Red Hat 7, which is going away at the end of June. So now I'm in the process of moving them all to newly set up VMs. So all of our Backdrop sites are actually going to be on one server. And I think we have all of them there except, I think they're all there. We're going to move a couple more once we get but this config makes it a lot easier for me to move all that content or all the sites to a different server.
So I think we kind of hinted at this earlier, but we started off with a project that identified those 6 sites that you saw the screenshots for. And the project went super smoothly, finished on time, under budget. And so we've got, in this case, we've got some extra budget to work with, and we'll do some bonus websites in the same budget, which I think is pretty great as well.
Yeah, for us, obviously, the transition has been extremely simple for our stakeholders. It is D7 with some added features, basically, as far as I framed it to the stakeholders. They like the new theme. We've managed to maintain a lot of what they originally had. Some of these themes were a little, or some of these sites were a little unique in the fact that while there was a main theme for, say, the front page, there were actually little sub-sites in a couple of these sites where the site's a little bit different. The color scheme changes a little bit. We were able to bring that along so that they're able to maintain what they've had in the past. Laren talked about, as we've gotten to the more and more complicated sites, we've added more features, we've added more things, we've fixed accessibility problems. And all of that has been pushed back into the very first site we did, which had like 50 nodes on it. It had a handful of views. It had, I think, 1 or 2 extra content types. So now that site can be radically improved. The big benefit, obviously, for me is that it's now one system. It is literally one code base. The only difference between the sites is the config files that configuration manager deals with. And there's no snowflakes anymore. Like I said, some of these sites weren't developed by me. I don't always, I'd have to go back into them and figure out what the previous developer did or what other code was in there. There was, all of our sites had very little, if any, custom code in them. But occasionally that would trip somebody up, or I might do something in a view one way, but the developer would do a view slightly different and put different, their philosophy would be different. But now it's all the same. I can go in and do all the work. My co-developer, Greg, can do the work too. We don't have, there's no snowflakes. That was getting to be a bit of a burden for us, was the number of snowflakes. So I think that's all I have on that slide. I guess we're down to questions and things. And yes, the comment, extra budget. Yeah, we came in far under budget and far under time. And I think that's a credit to Laren and Otten for what they were able to do. Greg and I did as much as we could. We actually developed a couple modules. We did a couple things. He and I are both learning some new processes along with this that'll make life easier in the future. Hopefully we'll be able to contribute back more. We've actually been speeding through these sites so quickly that I now have to go back and figure out, oh, what did I build in this module? Do I need to go in and refresh some changes for Backdrop and things like that? But at the moment, we're planning our 7th site, which will happen in the next 2 weeks. Our 8th site, our 8th site is going to be more complicated for a number of different reasons, including the chaotic way in which it was developed, but also it's a site that runs over summer a great deal, so we may have to build it and then wait until fall to roll it out. In the meantime, we may look at some of the other D7 sites that we have that are, I would say, substantially more complicated. But if we could move those to D7 or from D7 to Backdrop, we probably will. So.
Oh, thank you. That was really informative.